And our guest in the Element Well Studios is Senator Chris McDaniel. He is a candidate for Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Mississippi. Thanks for coming in, Senator.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You got it. So let's start out with what persuaded you. What was the impetus for you to jump in this race and suit up for Lieutenant Governor?
You know, it's a long decision-making process, obviously. I think it started with me considering the state of the nation as a whole. I have two young kids at home, one 16, one 11, and I never thought I would see the day that society seemed to be unraveling the way it is now. Not just the governmental institutions, but culturally and socially and just about every other way. And I look back just 20 years, and I try to imagine what my father would think if he were still alive, and he would see the country in this state, and he would be incredibly alarmed, and I am incredibly alarmed. And I've pinpointed, I believe, what the problem is. We need people of conviction. People of principle. Margaret Thatcher once said she's not a consensus politician, she's a conviction politician. And what that meant was she was going to fight for principle even when it was unpopular. For whatever reason, in the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, many people in our party, unfortunately, and I'm a proud Republican, as you are, but many people in our party have decided to just go with the flow, to not push back, to not stand on those very core principles. And what that gives you is one small incremental change after the other, constantly moving to the left. That's why we don't recognize the country. We need warriors. We need fighters. We need more Thatchers and Reagans and even Trump that has this combative emotional experience to push back against liberalism, wherever it is. And we've lost that. And so I look at this and I think, how best could Mississippi serve this fight? And here's what I think. The federal government's not going to fix itself. It's incorrigible. I'm not sure it can be corrected from Washington, but the states can, exercising degrees of sovereignty. We've seen Florida push back with DeSantis. We've seen Texas push back with Abbott. We've seen a couple of other states push back. That's how you right the ship. You provide balance once again with states reaffirming their sovereignty in this system. I think we can change the whole country if we can save the states first.
Interesting. So, Senator, you're certainly no stranger to taking on incumbents in statewide races. You've done that before. And in this case, you're taking on a first-term incumbent in Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hoseman. What about Lieutenant Governor Hoseman's style or decisions has caused you the most concern over the last 3 years?
Fundamentally, we're just very different people from a political perspective, philosophically speaking. I'll give you an example. When I was a little boy, I helped campaign for Kirk Fordyce in this state. He was the first Republican governor we had elected since Reconstruction. And I was just a kid, but I loved Kirk Fordyce. Delbert Hoseman pushed for Ray Mabus. The distinction was apparent very early, and it's been there since he started in politics. It's not that he's a bad person. I would never imply that. Politics shouldn't be about personal insults. It's just that he's more of a Democrat than he is a Republican, and he's governed that way in the Senate, not just with the appointment of Democrats in very powerful leadership positions. I'll give you an example. Gerard, there are only 16 Democrats in our chamber. 13 of those Democrats were appointed by Delbert Hoseman to chair powerful committees. I don't think that's right. I think if we're going to fight like we have fought to elect Republicans, we need Republicans chairing those committees, and Republican platform pushed in that chamber. It's been one issue after the other. Take the income tax elimination. Tate Reeves has done a great job pushing to eliminate the state's income tax. Philip Gunn has. The House Republicans have. Believe it or not, we have enough votes in the Senate to pass it. One man stands in the way of that, and that's Delbert Hoseman. That is not a Republican position, and I want to see conservative legislation passed. Look at the way he's behaved with redistricting. He saved the Democrats in the chamber, but he literally ended the political career of one of the most conservative senators that we have in this state. One thing after the other. Medicaid expansion.
Let's talk about. We'll get to that in a minute.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about the committee chair, because one of the concerns I have, Senator, in looking through that list of committees and their chairpersons, it looks to me like we got too many committees.
Yes, we do.
Way too many committees.
Yes,
and some of these get like no bills, one bill.
For whatever reason, the committee structure has grown many, many times over the years. We don't need that many committees. I'll take it a step further. I think the legislature as a whole is too large. We could scale it back quite a bit. But as far as the committee process, let's scale it back. But remember, the reason Republicans fight to win elections is so we govern as Republicans. I have no intention of helping Democrats pass their agenda. My position is going to be to help Republicans pass the agenda. And that begins, yes, like you said, eliminate some of those committees.
And that's my concern is that when I checked it, I believe there are 46 in the Senate.
Yeah.
And I think we have 36 Republicans.
Right.
So we end up, by necessity, having to appoint certain Democrats. The question is, are there some of those committees that you would handle differently, like health,
absolutely.
for example?
Take, for example, necessity.
Okay.
Public health is one of the most powerful committees in the chamber. And the most liberal member of our body is the chairperson.
Senator Hobb, right?
Yeah, Hobb, right, of public health. I mean, give me a break. It's not that Hobbs a bad guy. I actually like Hobb as a person. His politics are not Republican politics. He has no business chairing that powerful committee. And there are several committees like that.
Okay.
And so the idea is that we have to find ways to push conservatives and push conservative legislation, not to empower Democrats.
You were first elected to the state Senate in 2008.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? So you have served now for 4 terms.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Would you support term limits for legislators?
I've introduced that bill multiple times.
What happens?
It always dies in committee. Here's what happens. Just this last couple of years, Delbert Hoseman has killed that bill. Now, here's the issue. The only way I think that we can shock the system sufficiently to change the system, there are 2 basic ways. First of all, we could have a COS convention perhaps, but more importantly, term limits. Term limits. I don't like the lifestyle that's been created by this continual re-election of establishment politicians. I have pushed for term limits every year I've been there. Now, people say, well, McDaniel, you should have just stepped down. Well, that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'll give you an example. If the only people that always step down are the ones trying to get systemic term limits, guess what will never pass? So what we need is everyone to step down. Now, we can phase it and structure it. Well, it doesn't happen all at one time. But yes, systemic term limits for every member of the legislature.
Okay. Yeah. What about some of the statewide elected officials as well? Some have term limits, such as governor, lieutenant governor.
I believe everyone should be term limited. That's just a fundamental belief of my Jeffersonian mind that we need new blood and new energy. And I'm going to tell you, William F. Buckley once said he would trust the first 100 names in the phone book before he would trust the U.S. Senate, right? Yeah. I see that as well. I like people, and I think people can self-govern. And frankly, I would love to see more blue-collar people in office, more hard-working people in office. I think that's the kind of structure we need.
What about a recall process for legislators and statewide officials? That's something you could get behind?
I have introduced that bill as well. Absolutely. Politicians are no longer accountable. And some people say, well, every 4 years we have an election. But by the time they raise all of those unbelievable sums of money, the reality is they typically sweep right back into office. I would love to hold us accountable, every one of us. And if we can't fulfill our promises and hold down these conservative positions, the people should be allowed to bring us home. Absolutely, I support a recall mechanism.
Okay. Well, so while we're kind of in that vein, let's talk about the ballot initiative process.
Right.
Something that has passed the Senate this year. We had a House bill last year, couldn't get it out of the Senate. This year we got one coming out of the Senate. I think the House's position is, okay, we're just going to wait to see what the Senate does before we spend any time on this.
Right.
It at least in my view, the provision that would have allowed the legislature to amend or even veto a citizen measure. I think that was the original form of the bill. That was stripped, but what was left in the Senate version was still a very high, more than double threshold of signatures to get the measure on the ballot. Your thoughts?
That was a problem from my perspective. I'll give you an example. We Republicans make the argument, and I think rightfully so, that we are a government of the people, the consent of the governed. With that being said, what mechanism do the people have to actually govern? In our state, we had this initiative process, and it gave the people direct access, if you will, to the halls of power. We've had, I think, more than 200 attempts over the years to fulfill the hard requirements to place a ballot initiative on the ballot. I think only about a handful have ever made it.
That's right.
So how do we answer that question? We make it twice as hard. It makes no sense. We are disempowering the people of this state. In everything that we should do, we should be empowering these people. Now, you say you may not trust them, but you trust politicians instead. I think people can self-govern pretty well. So I like the idea of an initiative process. And they say, well, what about all the liberal things that could get passed? Well, we have to fight that, and we have to be articulate. My position is, think of all the great conservative things that could get passed. But the bottom line here is this. Yes, we need an initiative process, and it can't be as difficult as the Senate has made it. We need something workable where the people can actually get something done for a change.
And that has been the explanation. We got a break right here. We can talk about it on the other side. That's been the primary reason I've heard from the senators that support a higher threshold, is that maybe some well-funded organizations from out of state would get a measure on the ballot. It could be for something we don't like, such as abortion or recreational marijuana, Medicaid expansion, et cetera.
Well, if you disagree with those positions, then beat it. The idea is to have discourse, a debate in society, not to quell debate by making it impossible to pass something.
Chris McDaniel, candidate for lieutenant governor, is our guest in the Element Wealth Studios on middays. We're coming right back with more. We thank you so much for joining us. Senator Chris McDaniel, candidate for lieutenant governor of Mississippi, is our guest. All right, so back on the ballot initiative process. Senator, I don't know that I've seen an official position on the changing of the state flag, and I know there are a lot of folks out there that still believe that we should not have changed the flag, and that maybe a voice was offered on that years ago, and that should have stuck. How do you feel about that? Would you be in favor of perhaps a measure that would allow the citizens to vote to return to the old flag?
That would depend solely on the citizens, right?
Okay.
It depends on what they do. And I'll tell you my position there, and I think I made this pretty clear a couple of years ago. I think the people have a right and should retain that right to vote on those issues. I think the legislature stole that from the people. Now, I get it, and I know the arguments on both sides of the equation as to the design and what it should be or what it should not be. But put that aside for a moment. Are we a people that control the government, or does the government control the people? In this one particular issue, the government literally took that issue away, and I thought that was problematic. I would have preferred a ballot process where there were a number of options on there and have the people decide for themselves once and for all.
Okay. Let's talk about PERS.
Yeah.
I'm worried about PERS.
Yeah.
I'm worried about all defined benefit programs that pretty much the common approach in public sector retirement systems, and Mississippi's is no different. It is facing, I think, some financial headwinds. There's no secret there.
Right.
And, you know, there's really, I've said this on the program, you may disagree, Senator, and that's fine. Let's talk about that. But there's really three ways to fix it. You got to have more revenue, you got to have less going out, or a combination of the two. I mean, you could just reduce it down to that. What should we do here? There's I think, a plan as adopted by the board of PERS to raise the employer contribution effective. They pushed it out till 2024. It was supposed to go into effect this October, which would cost employers, public sector employers, which is really your tax money.
Right.
And then, of course, the legislature would have to enact legislation to increase the employee contribution. That's the way it presently works.
Right.
Bottom line is, what can we do? What are some ideas there?
This is a very personal issue for me because of my parents. My father was a college professor. I lost him back in '99, but he worked for 30-plus years and didn't make a lot of money. We were paycheck-to-paycheck kind of people. But he took that job in some respects because he knew he would have a stable retirement and a decent retirement at that. My mom also worked at the same college. And so, again, paycheck to paycheck. The bottom line here is, the first rule is, the one thing worse than a big government is one that lies to the people. And these retirees were promised certain things. We have to deliver on those promises somehow. We can't just sweep the rug right out from under them. And that's where it gets difficult. Because right now, it looks like it's about 60% funded roughly.
That's right.
And that number fluctuates from time to time based on market conditions. I suppose we could pray for a huge bull rally again, right? Yeah. And hopefully that would buy some time. But otherwise, we have to fulfill the promises to these people. My mom, for example, if we were to take those promises away, she simply could not survive. And she planned her life around that retirement. So whatever we do, we've got to secure it for these retirees somehow.
So 80% funding is considered kind of the benchmark for one that is in somewhat financially stable. Right. And we're a good bit below that, as you know. And then, of course, we have new folks coming into government, new employees, which we need to pay for the benefits of those who are retired. That's the pay-as-you-go nature of a defined benefit program. Would the idea possibly And I agree with you for sure. And I think virtually everybody in government would. We got to take care of those who are retired or certainly within a few years, some number of years of approaching retirement. It certainly wouldn't be fair to them.
Right.
But maybe there's a way we could transition to a defined benefit contribution plan, which would take some sort of one-time investment or maybe over a period of time investment on the part of the state to take care of those under the present defined benefit model and switch over to a defined contribution model.
Yeah, I'd have to see the details on that. And what's funny about that, politicians, for instance, always argue we are the least capable people to plan or govern somebody's lives, right? So this is a matter for experts and economists. And I think it's very important before we are rash anywhere. We need people that have specialized financial advice that could be given, and we can determine what the right answer is. Good. But without more details, I have a hard time coming
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
But I think the point is, and I hope everybody in that Capitol building knows something's got to be done.
Right. It's 30 years out, it seems like so far, but the reality is it's really not.
It's not.
From the standpoint of a government. So we have to begin to prepare, and hopefully we can make wise decisions to secure these retirees for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about another rather pressing issue in the state of Mississippi, and that's health care and health care delivery in particular. Reports are that a number of hospitals are struggling financially as well in the state. And though I know a lot of times the focus there is the rural hospitals, the urban hospitals are struggling as well. And there's a lot of factors that are causing that. I'm not honestly sure that the government can do a whole lot. But what we've seen this year is one particular measure would create a grant program, $80 million.
Right.
You did vote, I believe, in support of that.
Right.
That seems a bit like maybe some way to address the issue presently, but it's not a long-term fix.
It's not. And this issue is incredibly troubling. Mississippi is a rural state. Our people need health care, obviously. It gets complicated, and this goes back to the issue of having an expert in the room. I won't give you the man's name, but I had the great pleasure of meeting one of the CEOs of one of our hospitals up in North Mississippi some time ago. And it was very informal. We just sat around a fire and talked. And he gave me more real-world knowledge in 20 minutes than I've heard of that Capitol in 10 years. We got to bring those people to the table. They have to start making the decisions. I do not, however, believe that Medicaid expansion is the answer, and I'm not going to ever fall for that trap. I think we've been presented a false dilemma, a false choice. And they say, well, if you don't expand, they'll fail. I don't think that's true. Our friend Russ Latino, who's brilliant, by the way, has written several articles here recently on just why that's a false choice, a false argument. And I think that's something people need to read and recognize. I don't think we have to expand Medicaid to save the hospitals. But are there other ways? We got to find it. It could be tax breaks. It could be more competition. It could be the elimination of CON laws, whatever the case may be. But we have to get creative because our people do need health care. And no one wants to see these hospitals shut down.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that I can tell that's really plaguing the industry is just the amount of undercompensated care or uncompensated care, which is a big problem in Mississippi. One potential option is to enroll those who would otherwise be eligible in Medicaid expansion, able-bodied adults is what that would cover, in the ACA exchanges with the recent enhancements that were enacted in the Inflation Reduction Act. And I've talked to some folks in the Capitol about this. Maybe it's something the state could promote, educate, inform.
That's conceivable, absolutely.
As an alternative to just Medicaid expansion.
That's conceivable. I'll tell you something else to look at. We need to tackle, first of all, Medicaid as a whole. It makes little sense to attempt to expand something that's so inherently flawed as Medicaid. Medicaid has grossly exceeded the projections, financially speaking, ever since it was implemented. And if you look at the budgets of the federal government and the state government, you see this massive ballooning budget every year. And then you think about outcomes. You start asking the question, you're a businessman, is all that money getting the outcomes we deserve? And the answer is no. Medicaid patients don't fare well. And you look at the studies from other states, and strangely enough, sometimes even uninsured people have better health care outcomes than people on Medicaid. Doctors don't like to work with Medicaid. And all these issues inherent in the system. The Heritage Foundation a few years ago issued a paper, 16 ideas to reform Medicaid and to save it. It was brilliant. How many have been implemented? Zero. Conservative reform would work in that area if we just give it a shot.
Well, the first thing we got to do is strip out all the waste, fraud, and abuse, not just in Medicaid,
Absolutely.
but of course government spending overall. But that seems to be more embedded in Medicaid and Medicare perhaps than any other government program, and those two are gigantic.
They're gigantic, and it goes again back to the problem in some respects of politicians. These are very big programs, and we have to find ways naturally to protect them and save them, but they don't want to touch it. Instead, they cover their eyes and they just throw money at the issue. But as you know, Medicaid itself has expanded so greatly, we can't continue to throw money. You said it once before, there are 3 basic programs out there that are expanding at such an alarming rate that in about, 60 years, the unfunded liabilities are going to be in excess of $200 trillion. Is that the argument?
Yeah.
It really is kind of scary. So we have to find bright people to walk into the room and start figuring this stuff out for sure.
Well, and you make a point there that I'd like to explore with you, which I absolutely agree with, about bright people. We'll get that on the other side of the break.
Yes, sir.
Is that good?
That's good.
Yeah, we got Senator Chris McDaniel, candidate for Lieutenant Governor, in the Element Wealth Studios. We're coming right back. Mississippi in the Element Wealth Studios. Senator Chris McDaniel, candidate for Lieutenant Governor in the state of Mississippi, our guest. So, Chris, we were just talking offline. There's a bill that has passed the House in the Senate. Don't think it's coming to the floor yet.
Right.
And I've talked about it extensively here on the program. I feel very passionately about this legislation being bad legislation, honestly, in that it would restrict the sale of a new electric vehicle, to only outlets that are independently owned and have a brick and mortar presence in the state of Mississippi. It would restrict what I call what's actually commonly called the route to market.
Right.
If I, as a consumer, want to purchase a vehicle directly through the manufacturer, because they're all going to start doing this, I could literally order one up on my phone and have it sent to me.
Right.
If I want to do that in Mississippi, this bill would prohibit that.
Yeah. We have a lot of old hyper-regulatory environments in this state, and it's one of the things that's hampered us over the years, whether it's the old franchise arrangements they've created or all the tax and spend regulations that we have. If anytime you encumber the free market, Mississippians are going to suffer. Anytime you unleash the free market, we'll be productive and people will have upward mobility. This bill does appear to be very restrictive in the marketplace, and that's the problem. When it came to the Senate last year, I voted no. And it came through committee this year, and I was a no there. It never made it to the floor, or at least it wasn't called up on this year's calendar. I'm assuming they're waiting on the House bill to come over. But to your point, if you want to see Mississippi rise, if you want to see us really do well economically, you have to unleash the power of entrepreneurs. You have to unleash the power of profit. Free markets do that wonderfully. And there's a sense of code, even morality in free markets, because as people gravitate toward good products or competition comes into play, and it gets better and better for everyone. But people collectively spending their money on what they want to spend money on without government intervention or interference is always the way to more economic growth. So I'm with you. I completely get it.
Well, what some folks that I've heard express their concerns that there may be a situation where a consumer in Mississippi may purchase one of these vehicles through this route directly from the manufacturer. And we're not talking about just Tesla. That's kind of what everybody thinks of today. Yeah. But Apple is about to introduce their vehicle. Google's likely to have one. Right. Rivian, Lucid. There are a number of others that are just twinkles in the eyes of innovators somewhere. That's how this works.
That's right.
And so my concern is that what they say, or their concern, I should say, is that, well, we have to protect the consumer from making this purchase and not having a service outlet. But don't the markets offer that protection? Shouldn't consumers be able to make that call on their own accord?
Yeah, well, you have to let adults be adults. Let consumers decide what they wish to buy and how they wish to buy it. That's what liberty and freedom truly is. And that's one of the reasons this country grew into this incredible economic powerhouse, because it gave a sphere, if you will, a realm where there wasn't government regulation or restriction. People could voluntarily exchange as they saw fit. That's not a coincidence that we grew as quickly as we did. It was a result of freedom and liberty. Yeah. And I promise you, and I think you know this, if you inject that back into this system, get rid of these old, antiquated laws, Mississippi can rise. It can do better. We don't have to be last forever, but we have to change our way of thinking.
Yeah. Well, prosperity and profit is driven by creating value for the consumer.
That's right.
The consumer makes that call.
That's right.
Not government.
Never. It should never make that call. Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about pay for elected officials. I know this was a big matter last year,
right.
and you obviously have a voting record on that. First, the proposal, the bill to increase legislative pay, which if I think I got the process here, the sequence right, it passed, and then you made a motion to reconsider. And the motion was not tabled, which essentially allowed it and caused it to die, which means it didn't get through. This was the bill that would have increased, I think, the office expenses, as I recall, is what it's called.
Yeah, it was a tricky way to give legislators a pay raise. Now, look, I'm very happy that bill died. I'm very happy I had a hand in having it die. I held it on a motion to reconsider because I wanted the bill to die, and here's why. When we run for office, we know full well what the cost is. We know full well how much we're going to be paid. I can't stand the idea of politicians basically now coming into an office and then immediately voting themselves a pay raise. It's counter to everything I believe. And so, frankly, I think we're paid enough already. It should be a public service. We should be a volunteer effort for the most part. I know a lot of us come up there and we actually lose money during a session. But that's the whole point. It's public service. And if you don't want to serve that way, perhaps it's time to find a new job in the private sector. But I just don't like the idea of giving legislators pay raises. I think they know full well what the job requires, and they should stick to that money.
What did pass, as you are aware, is pay for statewide officials. There were increases there. The governor actually passed it by not signing it and letting it just expire in the time frame he needed to sign it. So that got through. How did you vote on that?
Initially, I voted no, and I fought it. When it came through from conference weekend, I was downstairs, and I wasn't there when the vote was called. That was my fault. I would have voted no 100%. I think I was marked as a not vote, but I can't be sure. I voted no every other time it came through, and here's why. To the same principle, I realize those are old pay scales.
They are.
I realize that, and I'm sensitive to that. But at the same time, remember, some of these seats we literally raise millions of dollars to acquire. And it's counterintuitive to claim then that for whatever reason that was enough, or that's not enough, if you will. I just don't believe politics should be a job where you make money. I know that's terrible. I know people are going to be mad at me by saying that, and I realize you have to have something to survive here in Jackson or wherever you live. But at the same time, I'm very sensitive to those issues. And so I remember when it came to the floor, we fought it as best we could, but that was a runaway snowball coming down the mountain at that stage.
The lieutenant governor and speaker of the House's pay would increase from the present level of $60,000 to $85,000.
Yeah,
would you be willing to accept the old pay?
Absolutely, I will.
You thought about that?
Absolutely, I will. If I'm elected, I will accept the old pay. I don't have a problem with that. The key here is to make sure that this is a service, and inherent in service is sacrifice, and I'm willing to make that sacrifice. And that's one of the things I think is so important about this position, and I know it's getting close to the end, but keep this in mind. You know, Tate Reeves has done his very best to govern conservatively. I know people sometimes disagree with certain things he does, whatever the case may be, but fiscally speaking, he's been a very, very conservative governor. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had conservatives in all those positions of authority? What if he didn't have to fight every day to see conservative reform passed? What if he actually could get things done, his agenda passed for the next 4 years? We could build a legacy of conservatism in a 4-year term. And that's another reason I'm running, because I think this is now the time to build that legacy of conservatism. God doesn't give us opportunities like this very often. Supermajorities in both chambers, full control of state government. Why are we playing defense? Let's get to work and do something big for Mississippi. Let's eliminate that income tax. Let's make sure the woke culture is dead for good in this state. Let's make conservatives leaders of this state and not just folks that pretend. That's the reason I'm running.
We had a bit of a victory along those lines. I would call it a victory this week with the bill that would prohibit gender transition surgery, reassignment surgery for minors in the state, headed to the governor's desk now.
Right.
The repack came over from the House. You voted for that.
Absolutely. I'm happy it passed. For whatever reason, the committee process, I'm sure Delbert Hoseman had it killed for the previous several years. So being an election year, I thought he saw this as a red meat piece of legislation. But it's a good piece of legislation, and I'll try to explain just real quickly. Minors, we don't allow them to drive vehicles, drink alcohol, own guns, whatever the case may be, because they're minors. Their brains aren't fully matured, if you will. For goodness sakes, there's no justification for a minor to be having some sort of gender reassignment surgery. And parents that allow that should pay some degree of a price. And doctors that perform those surgeries should have some price they pay. I'm glad we prohibited that action. It was a good step to once again fight back against that woke culture that's all over this society, but it doesn't go far enough. Look, these professors and these universities that are indoctrinating these kids, they've got to go. These public school teachers that are spending time talking about all these silly things that liberalism injects in our daily routines, they've got to go. But you've got to have people to stand up and say these things and to fight for these things. And right now, we don't have a full unified Republican Party. Let's unify this party, and let's get some things done over the next 4 years.
Yeah. What about your relationship, Senator? We're just about up against a break, but if you can stick around, we'll cover the rest of the hour in the next segment. Your relationship with the existing senators that are seated, many of whom are likely, if not most, to be reelected, and that would be the Senate that you would be presiding over as lieutenant governor. Do you feel like you have a good relationship?
I do. There may be one or two, obviously, but nothing personal. I happen to respect everyone in that chamber. I'm a professional. I try to be, and I hope they are as well. So sometimes if we disagree politically, I don't take that home with me. I don't hold grudges. I'm not going to hold grudges if I'm elected. We're going to work together to move conservative legislation. I consider them my friends. I hope they consider me that way as well.
Senator Chris McDaniel, candidate for lieutenant governor, our guest on Middays. We're coming right back. Stay with we are here, Senator Chris McDaniel, our guest. So before we went to break there, Senator, your relationship with the senators, it's going to be important that you have a good rapport there to be productive.
I've got a lot of close friends there, and they're good people, good men and women. I never let political disagreements sever friendships. I do not hold grudges. I have a job to do. I'm going to fight for my belief system, and I know some of those men and women are very principled, and they have jobs to do, and they're going to fight for their belief system. But I don't think, I know for a fact that life is way too short to hold grudges and to build personal enemies. That's not what this is about. I would like to be able to convince them, that conservatism is the right way, and I'm sure they would like to convince me that perhaps sometimes that's not the right way. We don't dislike each other because of that. So we're supposed to just move forward and still be professionals, and that's what I've always tried to do.
Looking at your push card, 5 major areas that you have stated, included on your push card: pro-life, pro-2A, cut spending and taxes. Anything in particular on the spending front you think that the state could spend less on?
Yeah, and I want to add one to that as well.
Okay.
That might have been an old addition.
I've got support small business. I didn't get around the rest of the list. Secure, transparent elections also listed.
Absolutely. We have to make sure our elections are fair, but also this woke culture. DeSantis has shown that we have to wage war against this. It has to stop.
He's leading on it, no doubt.
And he needs help, and Mississippi can help him do that. So we've got to end that woke culture one way or the other. And furthermore, every fight against socialism we can find, let's just push it out of the state. Let's just reject it. And he's done a good job down there doing that. Now, as far as taxes and spending, this is really simple stuff. Just a few years ago, 10 years ago, our budget was roughly about $4.7 billion. And now we're sitting on how much?
6.
Okay.
I think
it's more now, right, as far as in-state money, as far as in our revenue. So it's grown tremendously over the years. Now, that money belongs to the people. That money belongs to the people, not to the government. So to the extent that they claim we can't afford it, there's certainly fraud, waste, and abuse, including the size and scope of government that we can find ways to reduce. Yeah, we have to make it smaller, because a small government makes liberty bigger. It gives us more prosperity. This isn't an accident. So, yeah, we're going to reduce the size and scope of this government every place we can.
Half of our spending, roughly, is public education. Is there some opportunity there to perhaps consolidate school districts as an idea?
There's always opportunity there because it is such a massive amount, right? My wife's a teacher. My father was a teacher. My mother-in-law, 34 years as a teacher. So I respect greatly teachers. But there's got to be a way to make sure that money actually reaches the teacher as opposed to just the administrators. There has to be a way that teacher can utilize that money and actually teach kids as opposed to being micromanaged by bureaucrats. Teachers can do a great job if we'll get out of their way. And sometimes we're way too abusive when it comes to the standardized testing, way too abusive when it comes to details of their environment. I have great faith in Mississippi's teachers. I don't have a lot of faith in the overall bureaucracy of government. So, yes, there's always some places we can cut in that area for sure.
On the subject of education, there's a movement sweeping the country to implement universal school choice. Iowa just enacted that. It looks like it's likely to happen in Arkansas with the new governor, Sarah Huckabee. And essentially, this just allows the student, their family, to take the money allocated to them from the state for their public education and use it to attend school anywhere. It doesn't mean the private school, if they wanted to do that, has to accept them.
Absolutely.
But they could use their money in that regard. How do you feel about the universal school choice?
It's a really simple calculation. Put aside all the rhetoric for a moment from the other side of the equation and ask one question. Should a child be trapped in a terrible school? Should we tell that child, you have no options, you have no choice, you must stay in this terrible school? And if you answer yes to that, then you're doing a disservice to that child. So the corollary is this. Of course, parents should have options. Of course, parents should be able to select. And not just in the matter of schools, but also in the matter of religious exemptions for vaccines. This is a parental right. It's a parental issue. We have to empower parents here and not necessarily bureaucrats or politicians. We have to give control to the parents. So, yes, why not? Let's give some parents some options for a change.
I think you're going to see more Republican-led states really push to implement universal school choice. You know, it's been a problem here in the state. I've pushed for it personally, and it's difficult to overcome the various obstacles.
Well, what's going to happen is you'll get massive pushback from a small number of bureaucrats, a small number of politicians that want to maintain the status quo. But ask yourself, is the status quo working for our kids right now? And it's not. It's not. We've gotten better. We've made improvements, particularly in reading, but it's not enough. We have to have these kids educated. These children have to have opportunity, and the status quo doesn't always deliver that. So why not look in other directions?
Got it. We're running out of time, but something else I want to talk to you about offline, and then I'll tell the audience, and that's these statutes that have been in place for decades that allow exemptions to competitive bidding in the provision of certain services.
Right.
Nothing should be exempt from competitive bidding.
Not a chance. It's the people's money, and you got to drive down cost, and that's a way to do it. You're exactly right.
Senator, thanks for coming on the program today.
Thank you, sir.
Good luck
I appreciate
on the
it.
campaign.
Very
Senator
much.
Chris McDaniel, candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Mississippi.